Hello. Good afternoon and welcome to the Ron Robinson Theater, a part of the Central Arkansas Library System. My name is Ellen Samples and I'm the Director of Programming here at CALS, and I want to welcome you to this session of the 2025 Six Bridges Book Festival. It's been a lovely week so far with lots of authors visiting and some local authors who live here, like today's speaker. Tomorrow we'll have several more sessions, both here in the Ron Robinson Theater and at the newly renovated main library. We hope you'll join us. If you need a schedule for that, there are some out in the lobby at the table you passed as you walked in. Couple of housekeeping notes. If you parked in the library's parking deck that's accessed off of President Clinton Avenue on Rock Street, we can offer you parking validation. I know the lot got full, so if you aren't able to secure a spot there, sorry. And that sounded cavalier. I really meant it. I'm sorry. Tomorrow, the surface lot will also be closed. If you're joining us again for another day of the festival and the parking deck gets full, we're going to have a shuttle service. So if you park down at the Clinton Presidential Center, there'll be shuttles. They're going back and forth throughout the day. So that's better news for parking tomorrow. We also invite you to help provide feedback for the festival by completing a survey. There is a QR code that may appear on the slides at the end. There's also paper surveys in the lobby, as well as the collection box has the QR code as well. So if you would take a few minutes and provide us with feedback about your experiences with the festival and in our facilities, we would love to hear that information. If you're attending multiple sessions of the festival, you can fill out a survey for every session you attend, or wait till the end, collect all your thoughts together, and give them to us all at once. But we do really value that feedback, so please participate in that part of the festival as well. That's enough from me. So it is my privilege to introduce Stephanie Street, who's going to help us to welcome today's speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am really excited to be here today and really grateful to the staff of the Ron Robinson Theater for welcoming us. The Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Library is thrilled to partner with CALS and the Six Bridges Book Festival on this program. And thanks really to all of you for joining us today. Author and scholar Dr. Alex Vernon and best-selling author Dr. Chelsea Clinton will discuss Vernon's powerful new work, Peace is a Shy Thing, The Life and Art of Tim O'Brien. Veteran and author Tim O'Brien profoundly shaped how Americans understand the moral complexities of war. O'Brien is best known for The Things They Carried and other seminal works of literature. Dr. Vernon's biography, the first of its kind, offers a compelling portrait of O'Brien. Although not a native Arkansan, Dr. Vernon joined the faculty of Hendrix College in 2001, so I guess we're going to claim you as one of our own now. And Chelsea serves as vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, again, who I have worked for proudly for the last, 20-something years. In addition, she teaches at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health, and has written several books for young readers, including the #1 New York bestseller, She Persisted, 13 American Women Who Changed the World, and the entire She Persisted series. And with her mother, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, she has written Grandma's Garden and Gutsy Women. And I think probably the title she wears most proudly is Mom of 3 fantastic kids. And I'm so grateful because she, I think, got up at like 3 a.m. to be here for this and is flying right back after this program. So Chelsea, we're super grateful for you making the effort to be back in your home here in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, following this conversation, Professor Vernon will sign copies of Peace is a Shy Thing, which will be available for purchase right here on site. Now, before we begin, I hope you'll join me in thanking the leadership and staff of the Central Arkansas Library System for their hard work producing the Six Bridges Book Festival. And where's our friend Nate Coulter? Is Nate here? There you are, Nate. I couldn't see you back there. Obviously, we are so grateful to you for your long, ongoing partnership with us here at the Clinton Center. It's really a lot of fun, and it's always exciting to do these types of events together and the programs that we produce together for students and people here throughout the community. So thank you for your partnership. And I want to say congratulations, Nate. Tomorrow is a really big deal for our community. The grand reopening of the Central Arkansas, the main branch of the library, and what a tremendous gift for our city, for our citizens, and mostly for the children and families who live here in Central Arkansas. So I am really looking forward to that. Thank you. Now, it's my pleasure to turn over the program, Chelsea, to you to get us started. Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you so much for that warm welcome. It is always a joy to be back in Little Rock, back in Arkansas, particularly in partnership with the library system. I was a little kid and lived here. I went to church every Sunday with my mom, which of course is a somewhat meaningful experience, but also really convenient across the street from the library. Every Sunday after church, we would go to the library. And I couldn't imagine really my life without just the extraordinary attentiveness and patience of all the librarians who answered my questions and also helped kind of fuel and steer my curiosity, kind of whether I was interested in kind of queens of medieval England or a giant octopus or squid kind of in the depths of the oceans today. So really this has particular kind of resonance and meaning for me. I just want to add my gratitude to Stephanie's, for everyone here at the book festival, at the library system, and also at the Clinton Presidential Center, who've brought us all together. I know that events run the most smoothly when they've had just the most people who've worked hard to make them happen. So really just thank you all so much. And it's also a privilege for me to be here because I, like many Americans, am a great admirer of Tim O'Brien. I remember the first time I read The Things They Carried. I still don't know if I kind of have a concrete view of what happened at the end or really in the beginning or middle of Lake of the Woods. And so I'm just so looking forward to this conversation. And so Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Am I on?
I think so.
Okay, thank you for being here. Thank you to the book festival. I mean, all the folks that you've just thanked, I want to extend my gratitude to y'all. Thank you to Jay Barth, whose idea this was originally. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you all for being here. I mean, this is a beautiful Friday day. You could be anywhere else in the world, and you chose to be here with us. So thank you all for being here.
So Alex, I think the natural point to start is to ask you, like when you first encountered Tim O'Brien's work, do you remember kind of the first time you read either The Things He Carried or one of his other kind of pieces of fiction or commentary? And then I guess the second part to that question is, and then did you immediately think, I want to write a book about this man at some point in the course of my life?
Great question. So, and this somewhat touches on my own biography a little bit too. When The Things They Carried came out back in the beginning of 1990, a few months later, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and I was in the military at that time. And so when The Things They Carried was like making its big splash in the country, I was overseas and was totally oblivious to all of that was happening when people were really paying a lot of attention to that book. And came back, and I was in the Army for a few years. I didn't really know anything about it. So I first encountered The Things They Carried, when would it have been? Like around 1997, 1998. So nearly a decade after it came out, and I was a fairly fresh veteran at the time. And so what I can remember about reading it the first time, honestly, was absolutely bawling. I mean, there were a couple scenes in that book that just undid me. And I don't like the word cathartic, but maybe that's an appropriate word to talk about my original relationship with that book. And no, I did not think about writing a book at that time. A few years later, once I started working at Hendrix College, I brought O'Brien to campus, and we just struck up a friendship, and we're friends over the years. And then eventually in 2018, he asked me to write the biography. So this was never my plan to do this, but it's been a delightful journey.
I think you met O'Brien in 2003. I think
Yeah.
you share in the book, and he asked you to write his biography in 2018. How did then the process unfold from there? I mean, I know you conducted more than 100 interviews. You spent, no doubt, substantially more than 100 hours with his archives. Can you just walk us through kind of your research process? How involved was O'Brien? Was it what you expected it to be? Were there any surprises?
In terms of the process, so were there surprises? So he made himself available. When for years he said he did not want a biography written about him because who would, right? But he also realized that probably...
Well, there are lots of people, I think, who are quite happy to have had many biographies written about them.
Fair enough. But he realized somebody would write one someday, and so he wanted to be around as a resource, and really that was his role. To my knowledge, he was completely open and honest with me. He put me in touch with friends and family who probably would not have talked to me unless he had said, yes, this guy has my blessing to do that. And so, I visited him many times. We talked on the telephone many times. I don't even know how many emails we sent back and forth during this whole process. And actually one of the things I admire him most about it is he has still to this day not read a single page of this book, right? So like my publisher wanted to call it authorized, but it's not authorized in the sense that he approved it because he never read it, right? And I admire him for that, for allowing the book to have the integrity of being itself, right? And not being sort of a ventriloquist doll for him somehow too. So many conversations with him and others. And when I first started it, I knew the basics of his life story. We were friends enough, but not really. And so really it was just diving in, and as with any writing project, as you know, to some degree it's you're kind of making it up as you go along, right? And going to archives. The very first interview I did with somebody else, I didn't really know what I was talking about too much, right? But over the years, I would just talk to more people, and I got really lucky because the COVID year, I had an NEH fellowship to work on this book. So I was already stuck in my house, right, for a year because of COVID, doing the most of the research and writing on this book. And yeah, just throw yourself in.
I was interested in how you structured the book, and kind of part 1, part 2, part 3. I certainly learned a tremendous amount, particularly in part 1, about O'Brien's childhood and kind of the teachers, the debate coach, the people who really had shaped him as a young person, and also really as a writer. Backstage when I asked you if there were any questions you had hoped I would ask, or maybe you didn't get to talk about enough, you talked about the kind of the actual the writing process as almost like a physical thing, and I felt that way reading the book, both of your craftsmanship but also of O'Brien's. Can you talk about that with whatever reflections you are comfortable sharing, and also kind of how you saw how much his childhood, not just his time in Vietnam, but his younger years even, really shaped his writing decades later?
Sure. To that last point, I guess a couple of answers. One, so he's the oldest son, and he was his father's namesake, 3 children. Rural southern Minnesota, a farm town, Worthington,
Austin?
Minnesota.
Austin?
Worthington.
Worthington.
Yeah. He was born in Austin, and then moved to Worthington Elementary School, and so he talks about Worthington. And that's where he was drafted from, and Worthington has this famous Turkey Day parade, right? He likes talking about the Turkey Day parade. So he was raised in Austin and Worthington, and his parents had issues. His father was an alcoholic, and so he would talk about, when his father would have his bouts, Tim would retreat to the basement and just get out of the way. And he had 2 major recourses. One was reading, and he also tried to write a few short stories. The other one was magic. And he would just teach himself magic tricks, right? And eventually he would sort of this is junior high school for him, he made a little show of it and would go around to do birthday parties, at kids' birthday parties. But the way he talks about it is, it's him by himself in the basement in front of a mirror, because it's all sleight of hand stuff, for hours, endless hours of perfecting his craft with an imagined audience somewhere out there. When he becomes a writer, he's doing the exact same thing. Right? That to me, it's sort of amazing to think about his magic as kind of training ground for just being in a room by himself writing. When he first asked me to write this book, he said, it's going to be boring because I spend 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day in my underwear at a typewriter. Like what are you going to say? It's going to be interesting about that. And that is his life. Another thing I would say about his childhood too, you know, he was a child of the Eisenhower 50s, right? In middle class, middle America, and he was raised, as I hope all of us were, to be kind, to be nice, not to resort to violence. And then the draft comes, and he's drafted, and they stick a gun in his hand, and they say, go over there, and you are going to hate those people and shoot them. And I mean, he has never quite gotten over how essentially overnight the same people who were telling him to be nice and don't hit people were now telling him to hate and kill. And that's been sort of one of those sort of aspects of his kind of, I guess, moral injury is a word we use sometimes, right? But that's one of the things he struggles with too. And in terms of physically writing the book too, I mean, I really tried hard to make it readable too. I mean, the biographies I've read, often they are so dense with information, or they are so loose with telling a story that they don't feel legit anymore. So I tried hard with that balance and really tried to make it readable so that there are kind of surprise chapters along the way that fit, I think, where they are, but that you don't quite, when you turn the page, you shouldn't know what's coming, right? And you should want to find out what's coming. So I tried to structure it that way. The very beginning chapter, too, is actually, it doesn't start in his childhood, right? It starts his senior year in college because he graduated from McAllister College in Minneapolis the spring of 1968. The spring of 68, I should just say that, and hopefully a lot of us, I see some people nodding along, right? The Tet Offensive happened in the spring of 68. Dan Rather said, we're not going to win this war in 68, or I'm sorry, Walter Cronkite said, we're not going to win this war in 68. Martin Luther King gets shot and killed in 1968. And for O'Brien, graduate school deferments go away. He was going to be at Harvard the next fall in graduate school, and deferments went away. And so that's where I start, because now suddenly he knows when he graduates, he knows he's going to get drafted. And he just has to agonize over that decision over that summer until he finally, the way he describes it, sleptwalked onto that bus to go to Fort Lewis for his basic training.
And then I know you just said you want everyone to be surprised by the next page. I wonder, though, if you can, even at a high level, talk about how you decided to divide the book into 3 parts.
Yeah, so I really wanted to focus a lot on, I mean, the way Tim talks about it is he dreamed about being a writer as a child, never talked about it because he thought, I just live in this small farm town in southern Minnesota, I'm never going to be a writer. So he never really talked about it. And he says Vietnam made him a writer. And his language is actually, when Vietnam collided with my life, is what he often says too. And so I really wanted to focus on that, like what made him a writer? How did that happen? And so the first part of the book is that collision chapter, when he's at McAllister, and then it goes back to do his childhood and through Vietnam, and that's the first chunk of the book, is right up through Vietnam. And then he comes home, and his first book is a memoir, actually, of his Vietnam experience. So then the middle section is the 1970s in one section, because that's when he's finding his feet as a writer. He wasn't on an English major, he was a political science major, and so he had to teach himself. He had to read everything he could get his hands on and teach himself. And he was in graduate school at Harvard. He had an internship at the Washington Post during this time as he's trying to figure out the writing thing. And so that second section concludes with his third book, his second novel, Going After Cachado, which won the National Book Award. And once he wins the National Book Award, he has effectively arrived on the literary stage. And so then the third part is everything after that, right? And so really I'm trying to focus on his becoming a writer, and of course I catch him up to the present as well, and that's really the kind of structural design.
I want to talk about the title too. I think it's such a kind of a beautiful and compelling title. Peace is a shy thing. When did you kind of know or kind of have a revelation that this should be the title of the book, and how, if at all, did it affect the writing process for you and what you thought really should be kind of highlighted and elevated kind of throughout it?
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to remember when exactly in the process that happened. as I was starting to write, there's a documentary filmmaker who made a film about O'Brien, The War and Peace of Tim O'Brien. His name is Aaron Matthews. It's a great film if you want to watch it. It's actually kind of about the writing of one of Tim's last books, most recent books. It's really fascinating. And he's a really nice guy, and he sent me all the transcripts of all the interviews he did of Tim. And so I'm reading these transcripts, and that phrase popped out on one of the transcripts. And I just sort of knew instantly that's my title. And partially I knew that because of the way Tim talks about himself. Tim says, I'm not a war writer. Like, he hates being called a war writer for a couple reasons. One, he was not a natural soldier. Like, soldiering was just sort of not his thing. And so to be sort of labeled as a war writer and somebody who does that stuff just feels wrong to him. He went kicking and screaming into the military, right? So that feels wrong to him. He really likes, and also he doesn't like it because to be called a war writer for him feels like diminishing what he does. He writes about people, he cares about people, and I think one of my favorite quotations from him is war is the environment of life magnified. And what he means by that is it's nice dramatic compression, right? You are facing death, you are facing moral decisions that you have to instantly do, and so it becomes a great way to reveal character because of the war situation. But he really cares about people, right? And he really cares about those sorts of issues. And he would much rather be called a peace writer than a war writer. And so, I mean, knowing that about him, when I saw that Peace is a Shy Thing, then that just stuck in my head. And that the passage it comes out of, he basically says, you know, war is loud, war calls attention to itself, but peace, you're just walking down the street and there's a sprinkler in a lawn and you maybe kind of notice it and appreciate it, but you don't think peace the way you do think war. And that's what he means by peace is a shy thing. That it doesn't call attention to itself, and so that just sort of, it fit to me as the title for a book for someone who really, even though we call him a war writer, what he really wants in the world, as I hope we all do, is peace.
I want to get back to that, but I also do want to ask, you have a chapter, though, called Peace is Hell. So how do you reconcile that chapter title with everything you just said?
That is my least favorite chapter title. I could not figure out for the life of me what to title that chapter. So, you know, Tim has always said, and he will say to this day, he did not have PTSD, or if he did have PTSD, I mean, when he first came back, PTSD was not a thing, right? It was a thing, but it was not named until 1980. Well, shell shock from World War I, right? So they did talk about post-Vietnam syndrome, but that was a casual language. It wasn't a formal, official prognosis. And so, I just lost my train of thought. What was the question? No, you're good.
About Peace is Hell.
Oh, yeah. So he said no PTSD, but in the 1990s, he had a rough spot. And for all kinds of personal reasons, and there was a year where, as he has told me, every single day, he had to decide not to kill himself. And so, and he wrote a New York Times article in 1994, New York Times Magazine, called The Vietnam and Me, which is sort of somewhat about that horrible, bleak time in his life. And so, and I think one of the phrases in that article is, you don't have to be a Nam to be a Nam. And that's what he meant, right? That we all have our own battles that we fight. And I think he almost feels as lucky to have survived that year of suicidal ideation as the year in Vietnam, too. And so Peace is Hell just fit the spirit. I don't like it. I don't know. I just don't like the sound of it, but it fit. It was the best I could do.
I want to come back to Vietnam, but before then, I was reflecting as you were talking about, you know, the fact that O'Brien is not only uncomfortable but like rejects the framing of him as a war writer, and certainly, you know, he spent a good portion, as you detail in the book, of the years after the war, like advocating for peace. One of the other parts, and I can't remember in which kind of chapter it fell, that I was quite struck by, was how devastating it is for him when young men generally come up to him and tell him they enlisted in the military because of the things they carried, that they found it kind of so full of nobility and service and self-sacrifice that inspired them to join the military. I understand why people have had those reactions, and also really found it quite painful to read that from him is relayed by you.
I mean, it is painful for him. He'll talk about going to some kind of reading or whatever, and somebody will come up to him at the signing and say, "Thank you, I joined the military because of you." And he'll just talk about how he will go back to his hotel room and grab a scotch and just like stare in the mirror. And I won't repeat to you the language he's used to me about the words he threw at himself for like this was the last thing he had in mind. And I think part of it too, though, is like his books are not, even though his books are anti-war, they're not lectures, right? I mean, he's really just trying to get you in the combat boots of the people who are doing it. And so he's not haranguing against the war in a way that a lot of readers would maybe instantly turn it off. So he's just trying to get you to the experience, but absolutely, he hates when that happens, yeah.
And his writing feels profoundly American to me. It feels very much like the work of an American citizen who is trying to help people understand what citizens have been called or sometimes required to do.
Yeah,
I think is important too.
Absolutely, yeah, and the things they carry, there are no heroic deaths. It's sort of one of his, like somebody dies because he drowns in what turns out to be a village's latrine. Like they just know that people go to the bathroom in this sort of area and somebody drowns in that, right? That's the way people die in his books, not heroic deaths, which is another sort of way of thinking, of saying how surprised he was every time somebody says, "You made me want to join the military." And he's like, "Because you wanted to drown in a shit field? Like what did that makes no sense."
Because people want to have a higher purpose. I do want to talk about Vietnam, in that I know O'Brien went to Vietnam, I think in 1994. I went to Vietnam with my parents a handful of years later, when my father kind of led the effort to normalize relations with Vietnam, and found the experience incredibly moving, especially given the number of Vietnam veterans that were part of my father's administration or were part of that kind of delegation. How much do you think that trip kind of shaped him, as a writer subsequent to his return? And can you share with the audience like how did you go to Vietnam during the writing process?
I did not go to Vietnam during the writing process, but I've been 8 or 9 times before he asked me to write the book. I've been, and incredibly valuable experience to go there. And so that, I mean, even to go back to the question about the physicality of writing, when I write about the jungles and I write about the color of the soil, I hope that because I've experienced it, it's different in the writing. Like I could have read about these things and sort of used the words on the page, but I like to think from having been there, it actually translates, that the reader can feel it a little bit better because I feel it, right, physically too. So he went in 1994, and he had thought about going in 1990 with another group of veterans who were writers, and he decided he wasn't ready emotionally. He went in 1994. At the time, he was in a significant romantic relationship, and the woman he was seeing wanted to go, and so I think he says I kind of went because she wanted to go, and he has said he is so grateful to her since, because having her with him made Vietnam not his war anymore, made that word not synonymous with war, but he said I could be a tourist with her when I went. And he did go back and he saw the place where his battalion was on the ground, right? He sort of went back to all the sites he saw. He went back to the site where he was wounded. He saw all the sites, the war sites, and talked to Vietnamese veterans as well. But he was also doing the touristy things, although this is 1994, so we had not yet normalized relations, but what touristy things to do, he would do those things. And he just really appreciated the fact that he could be there as a tourist. Before he went, so you mentioned In the Lake of the Woods earlier, he had finished drafting that novel before he went, and then when he came back home, he madly revised that book. For one thing, so In the Lake of the Woods
Gosh,
is
I'm
about...
so curious about what the first draft would have been.
It's well, the first draft is really crazy, but the draft that he was working with at the time, it does involve the My Lai massacre, and so when he went in 1994, he went to the My Lai massacre site, and he talked to survivors, and he walked the ground, and so that, having been there then, he came back, and he had to revise it because he'd actually been on the ground at that point and talked to people.
I always find it inspiring when people are, I feel like we use this word too much, but I can't think of a more apt one, kind of vulnerable to new experiences that evolve them. as people, as parents, as friends, as professionals, as authors. I wonder, Alex, you mentioned earlier that you were deployed overseas when the things they carried came out. You're a graduate of West Point. You're an Army veteran. How important do you think, if this doesn't kind of put you too on the spot, your military service was to your ability to write this book? Do you think a non-military vet could have written with the same sensitivities, nuance, kind of holistic appreciation for O'Brien's life?
It's a good question. I teach up at Hendrix, and I teach some war literature courses, war film courses, and when I teach those courses, I never tell my students I'm a veteran, because I just, for all kinds of reasons, but the biggest, I don't want that in their heads, and I don't want them to feel like they are unauthorized to speak because there's a veteran up there and he's got all this experiential authority or something, right? The conversation's about the literature, and it needs to stay there, and as citizens, they need to feel authorized to have these conversations, right? In terms of this book, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure somebody else could have written just as good a book as well, but I think this is different because of that. And that's one reason he asked me to write the book. I mean, on a very basic level, I know the vocabulary. If it had been somebody else and he had said, first sergeant, the person would have said, what does that mean? It's second nature to me. Like, I don't need those lectures from him, right? So it's all very second nature. And then even emotionally too, I mean, he has moral injury. I've got my own moral injury from my war, right? And I sort of know we had totally different wars, and yet we overlap in some kinds of ways in a kind of psychic emotional space. And so I think that was incredibly helpful. And again, like just on the very basics of vocabulary, again, to go back to the physical writing, so I ordered, I can't remember where I got them from, but I ordered military maps of his area of operation, and then I found all his battalion unit logs that have like grid coordinates of where his company was and there's where his platoon was. And so I spent many days charting out like where all these places were on this map so that I could talk, about, they traveled 5 clicks over this terrain, whatever it was, right, to sort of kind of get that kind of realism. But my dining room table, you can ask my wife, who's here, was just this map for months that just sort of sat there. And weirdly, I got this perverse pleasure because, and there's all kinds of, I was a lieutenant, a platoon leader, and there's all kinds of jokes out there about lieutenants with maps. But to sort of be able to do that was a weird kind of way of being in touch with my old soldier self without actually thinking about my old soldier self, but just sort of physically experiencing it through that map.
I have an image of you with lots of thumbtacks, like, charting, and maybe a ruler and a pencil. I'm curious, you said that O'Brien hasn't read the book, but I am curious now that you've had the chance to kind of, be out talking about the book and that the book has been out for at least a little bit of time. Have you heard from any of the people that you interviewed, or kind of his family, friends, people he served with, kind of what their reactions have been to the book?
If anybody's had a negative reaction, they have chosen not to share that with me. So yes, and I've heard from his sister has read it, his wife has read it. They both loved it. Aaron Matthews, the director I mentioned, who directed the film about it, he loved it. Also Eric Hansen. So I had this. I knew that this book was going to be, at least I think it's a special book. I knew it was special when Eric Hansen is Tim's best friend from the Army. They met at basic training. Eric would become his best man for his wedding. And Eric also had writing ambitions. And so after the war, they were stationed in different places during the war, and they would write letters to each other in the war. And then after the war, they lived apart, and they would write letters. And this is when Tim is first starting to become a writer, first like, I'm writing my first novel. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And these letters are just filled with details about Tim's writing process. More so than his life, right? Just writing process kind of letters. And Eric, who is an amazingly nice person and also a total pat rat, when I started writing this book about 8 months, 12 months into it, this box of 130 letters from Tim appears. And so he shows them to Tim. Tim says, scan them all, send them to Alex. So he scanned them all, sent them to me, and I just had this treasure trove of material. In the very beginning, Tim had said, if you could figure out how, when you write this book, to get inside my head when I'm writing, That's what I want you to do. Of course, I can't do that, but I have these letters that are the next best thing for doing that, right? And so all this to say, Eric Hansen has read the book and also has told Tim, you picked the right guy to write this book, that this is really a special book.
That's great. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I was struck, by O'Brien, saying that he thought his fictional account of war actually was more, I don't know if he used the word accurate or faithful, than the memoir that he wrote. Why do you think he said that, and what lesson, if any, should we take from that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when he first got back, his first book was a memoir, If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home, long, cumbersome title. There's a whole story behind the title, which I won't bore y'all with. And he wrote it quickly and published it, and there it was. And he knew it was his first book. He sort of thought about it. It's actually quite a good memoir, but he didn't really think that much of it. And then he wrote a couple of novels, and he eventually came around to The Things They Carried. And The Things They Carried is similar to that memoir in structure. They're both very episodic, right? I mean, the Things They Carried is a series of short stories, basically, and the memoir is a series of episodes, right, from him in the war. And he says that captures his war experience better. And it's a really interesting question. I think part of it is because, journalism, the kind of foundational principle behind a journalism is you weren't there, and so I'm going to tell you about it. And most memoirs, war memoirs, and I think even a lot of war fiction, that's the same premise. Like, you weren't there, so I'm going to tell you about it. When O'Brien writes The Things They Carried, in all his novels, but especially that one, he really wants to put you in the boots of the soldiers. He wants you to be there. He doesn't want to keep this distance. And he manages it in a couple of different ways. I think one of the most interesting ways he manages it is to think about, so a lot of his characters are imagining, like as you do in war, you're sitting around, you're like imagining what just happened to me, what's going to happen, what could happen, like you're just in your head. And O'Brien takes his readers into that imaginative space of his soldiers. That's really clever, right? Because maybe as a reader, I can't actually put on boots and walk in the jungle, but I can meet a character in that imaginative space where they are too, right? And that gets them there. Another thing he said about it, which I think is really interesting, so in The Things They Carried, for those of you all who know that book, there's a character named Tim O'Brien in the book that he says is not him, right? Which confuses people. Some people read the book, they think it's memoir, and that irritates them when they find out it's fiction. I've had students say they've thrown it across the room when they found out it was fiction. And that does two things, I think. One thing is, like the way he talks about it, he could never quite believe he was a soldier. Like, that was me, but it wasn't me. And so by naming the character Tim O'Brien, who's a fictional version of himself, that kind of gets after that. Like, that is me, but it's not me at the same time. It kind of communicates that, right? And the other thing about it, too, is we readers now are asking, did that actually happen to Tim O'Brien? Because it's fiction, but it's got his name. Well, actually, that's his experience of war, because he's in a firefight, and things are crazy, things are happening, and after the firefight, he and his buddies are sitting around, and they're saying, what just happened? Did that actually happen? And so strangely, by naming the character Tim O'Brien, weirdly, we have an analogous experience to his experience in the war.
Before we open it up to questions, we've talked a lot about The Things They Carried, and we've only kind of briefly touched on his other work. I mean, you mentioned Going After Cacciato, which obviously, as you said, put him on the map because of not just the National Book Award, but it won a number of prestigious awards and recognitions. Is there anything you would like the audience to know about kind of the other books he wrote, how those might have shaped him as a writer? Kind of, were there any other kind of intervening events, like you spoke about when he went to Vietnam and then came back and kind of rewrote, League of the Woods? Just anything else that we should know either about his process or how his process in life intersected?
Sure. I mean, probably the big, in terms of event of his life. So I mentioned his alcoholic father, and he did not want to become a father for many, many years. He did not want. His father was an amazing man, a great storyteller and charming, but he also felt like his father was not always there for him, and he did not want to. He was scared he's going to become his own father as a father, so he resisted that for a long time. Finally, he met his current wife Meredith, and they almost broke up, and she finally, and over children. She wanted children, and he did not. But they eventually reconciled and had children, and he will now say, she saved my life with that. Like, that was the best, having children was the best thing in his life, right? And it is clearly, if you read his work since having children, there's a palpable difference in that kind of, I don't know, like, he used to talk about how writing was always hard. like his Vietnam work, it just was hard to write. And now he says, I only want to write if it's fun. Like, if I start to feel that, like, pain of writing, he just walks away. He just wants to enjoy it. And he writes largely, in some of his books, he is explicitly writing for his children.
As a parent, I love that. Any questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am, right there in the black and white, I think, or brown and white.
Yeah, they're actually, so the question is, in the things they carried, a lot of the characters are presumably based on people he knew, and so how did he sort of turn them into fictional characters and process that? They're actually only really loosely related, right? So he will take events, and he does this with his non-war writing also. He will take certain events from his life and transform them, and some characteristics of characters, but there may be a character in the book that's actually a composite of 3 or 4 people that he actually knew, and so he really does fictionalize. And as he says, all writers write from their own life. I mean, we all have to at some point just adapt and make it fiction. So it's actually, there are very few characters you can really say, that guy is that guy, or that girl is that girl. It's too hard because he has been creative enough with it. And a lot of them are versions of himself as well, right? I mean, a quick example of that is in the things they carried. When O'Brien was overseas, he was writing letters to a girl he was madly in love with back home, and she broke up with him, in a letter. But he kept all her letters and would carry them around and sort of think about them. And she had sent him a poem that he would, like, recite in his head as he marched. And the things they carried, there's a character whose girlfriend sent him a pair of her stockings, and he wore it around his neck, and she broke up with him. But the character keeps wearing those stockings, right? So that's like an example of the kind of thing where he would take something real and just change it a little bit, but it still carries the weight of the actual.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Yes, yes, ma'am. Another question, please. I asked.
The question that we all hate. So about 14 months before this book came out, I had published another book on Ernest Hemingway, on For Whom the Bell Tolls. They're 14 months apart, and they were both in some ways like career-long projects in a sense. So it's a fallow period. I mean, I'm doing some international collaborations on Hemingway stuff. We're publishing all of Hemingway's letters, which means we've got to find them, we've got to annotate them, like all that stuff. So I'm on some editorial teams doing work, but I don't have a book itself yet. I'm kind of letting myself and my family take a break from that.
I wonder, Alex, if leading off of that, then I'll get to the hand that I just saw. How, because you've written now quite a few books. How do your kind of research and writing efforts intersect with your teaching and vice versa?
Absolutely. I mean, they are totally intertwined, right? I mean, I'm a better teacher because I write, and because I do scholarship, and I'm a better scholar because of my students. Because my students, I mean, our Hendrix students are amazing, and they ask great questions, and they challenge me. And I have a horrible memory, so I can teach a novel 20 times, but I have to reread it before class every time. And it's always a surprise. Like, every time I reread a book, there's something I find I hadn't seen before. My students help me see, but they ask questions that I know the answers to, or can help them think about because of all my research. So I can't separate the two.
So at the end of every Hemingway novel, you're like, oh my gosh, why did that still happen?
Yeah.
You're like, you could have survived. Yes, you'd raised your hand.
That's a good question. I don't know that he ever will. And the reason, I spun it as a very noble thing that he allowed my book to have its integrity, which is true. What he says is that, you know, nobody likes to hear themselves or see themselves on video. Nobody likes to hear themselves like on a tape recording and just magnify that by a zillion reading somebody's biography about you, right? He just thinks it would be totally too uncomfortable for him. I don't think he will. I mean, I don't know that, but I mean, 2 days ago, he turned 79, and I don't think he will. But if he does, I mean, at this point, I don't care. I mean, I feel like I have enough validation from other sources for sure, and I'm proud of it. And so I think he would like it, and he might have some quibbles here and there, but you know, even during the writing process, he would tell me a story, and 2 months later, I'd ask him about the same thing, and he remembered it differently, right? And so I would think that if he has some quibbles, I might say, he's misremembering again.
Yes.
I'm curious about whether there is a soldier, living or not, who led wars that you would also like to write about.
I don't know. I have not thought about that question, but it's something to think about. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I have recently thought about. So I went to West Point, and I had a cohort of cadets in the same cadet company, and we were in the same cadet company for all 4 years. And as you can imagine, many of them had careers in the service. And given where we are as a nation right now, we all have taken different journeys and have arrived at different places in our politics, religion, lives, whatever. So recently I just thought, what if I did a book that is essentially a profile of all 24 of us, like a chapter's a profile of each of us, and we were at West Point in the last years of the Cold War, to just sort of think about everybody's journey from the Cold War to the culture wars today, and with no commentary. Like if you want to be, you know, a radical Marxist, or if you want to be a MAGA Republican, I don't care, right? But I would just sort of think it'd be really curious, maybe for readers to see that. So that's the closest I can come to answering that question.
Really? Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a couple of comments, and then I want to tell you how Tim's books have helped me, and how I found that your book has helped me too. And I've only finished the first part of your three-part book. So, but I was born in 1946, same year as Tim, and same year as your dad too. And but I had a great childhood and everything. And I think that those of us who grew up in that era of the 50s, you know, just like you said, you know, we were taught to do things good and do things right. And then I went to the University of Arkansas on a football scholarship, and I went to get drafted by the Green Bay Packers, but I got drafted by Uncle Sam. And, you know, and I like what Tim says, that he was a coward, that he didn't resist the draft. And I was a coward too. I didn't resist the draft because my father was a hero in World War II. And, you know, I couldn't face the fact that I couldn't, you know, my father would hate it, you know. And so I submitted to the draft. And then, but unlike Tim, in 7 days into it, I decided that this guy, of course, I was 23. And of course, all the kids around me were 18 and 19-year-olds, you know, and this drill sergeant, I think, saved my life, because he said, listen, Richardson, you're going to, you know, unless you do something, you're going to end up in Vietnam in infantry, and you're going to die over there. And I believed him, and because, you know, that was the hot time of the war. And I didn't make it to when I would have I love this whole story about not making it to the lottery. You know, I was born on the 4th of July, believe it or not, and the 4th of July and the lottery came up big numbers. But anyway, so the one thing that I was really this drill sergeant said that he would, if I would take another year, that he would guarantee me a school where I would go to San Antonio, and they were going to train me as a combat medic, but then I would be a specialized medic. And so Dr. Clinton, I was in public health in the Army, really. I was a preventive medicine specialist. So, and I was proud of my service over there because I wasn't there to take lives. I was there to help these guys live longer, hopefully. But the thing that you know, I was so upset with my local draft board for sending me there, you know, and that's what I learned from. Yeah, there was in your book there was really great discussion about that, and so that helped me to process through that. But the two things that Tim wrote that are hit home with me are the things they carry and Rainy River, because I came so close to going to Canada, and you know, and I know Tim thought about that too, and it was so, and then the whole Rainy River story just came, it helped me. So the two things that I've read other things that he's written and everything, but the two things that were important to me were the things they carry. Because I was not in combat, you know, but I knew what those kids were going through, you know. And so by the time I finished my year over there, I extended to stay there another 7 months to get 6 months taken off my time. But I had come to, you know, I came to peace with it there, but then when I got back, I was angry. And because I hadn't planned on my life being anything like that. So, but Tim's writing has helped me to process the way I was, and your writing has made me think back about my anger at the draft board and being able to forgive those guys for wrecking my life. So.
Thank you. I will call Tim next week and share that with him.
Other questions or comments? Yes. I mean, this is I live in New York City now. This is a live conversation in New York too, where thankfully we rallied a lot of New Yorkers to push back against the proposed, you know, budget cuts in New York City that the City Council was considering in the last budget cycle to substantially cut the hours that the libraries would be open, including on the weekends, which of course goes directly to your question, at least for school-age children during the school year. This is probably not then going to be a surprising answer, both because of who I am and because of that recent experience that I had as a voter in New York City. Like I think it very much comes down to, you know, do we vote for people who value investing in education broadly, investing in our public school system, investing in Head Start, investing in other early childhood efforts, and investing in our public library system. I think all of that ideally is treated as a holistic ecosystem by which we want all of us, especially though our children, to have access to, I think importantly, both books but also librarians. I mean, that's what I shared earlier. Like what I so remember about my experiences, which really were like weekly at the library, were the librarians. I mean, I could tell you some of the books I read, but I could tell you far more about the conversations I had with the librarians, and to draw on the great Maya Angelou, how they made me feel, right? That they made me feel like that my curiosity was welcomed, encouraged, that they were excited by my excitement, and I certainly, it always felt deeply authentic and sincere to me, and I would hope that every child would have that experience, every week. But I think we have to continue to advocate and then vote for elected officials who feel the same. Oh, well, thank you. We're almost at time. But before we close, I want to just ask Alex one more question, which is, I'm sure, one that you get asked a lot. Because you've written, so many books, I'm astounded by that kind of disclosure, however many minutes ago, that you published a book about Tim O'Brien and Ernest Hemingway in 14 months, like two of our great American writers. It just must have been a feat of enormous kind of imagination, persistence, but also organization. I wonder what advice you might have for any aspiring or new writers of any age, right? Whether it's someone who might be thinking about writing their first book as a young person, or maybe as a young at heart person. What advice would you give to anyone who is thinking about being a writer, or at least thinking about writing something, which I would argue is the same thing?
Apparently go hang out with librarians.
Yeah.
and get them to feed your energy. I mean, obviously, everybody says read because you have to read, right? Because you've got to hear the voice in your head. I guess my only piece of advice is, most of my books, when I start, I really don't know that much about what I'm talking about, right? I don't feel like I'm an expert pronouncing. I'm discovering and writing. And so I hope that to some degree that sense of curiosity and joy that I'm experiencing, again, kind of gets onto the page and gets transferred to the reader somehow. And as I mentioned to your earlier question, with this book, I just dove in, right? And I think the biggest advice I would say is I hear people often talk about writing abstractly and wanting to write abstractly, and they have projects and plans, and then 3 years later I'm having the exact same conversation with the same person and they don't have a single word on the page, right? And so I guess my advice would be just start. Just start writing and get feedback from people, but if you're not actually putting words on a page, you're never going to be a writer.
Practice. Alex, thank you so much, really. This has been just a fascinating conversation for me. Thank you again to everyone here at CALS and at the Clinton Presidential Center, to everyone at the Six Bridges Book Festival, and really to our audience. Thank you all for your engagement today, for the fantastic questions, for the commentary, for the kind of shared memories. I really have enjoyed this so much, and I'm so thankful to everyone who made it possible. Please join me in giving Alex a big round of applause.
Thank you.